Hello to everyone. Hope everyone's well. Thanks for joining us for today's podcast. I'm Andrew Fairman, Senior Associate at MSB Solicitors, and I'm also the Head of Compliance, Building Safety and Decarbonisation in the Social Housing team at MSB. With me today, I've got Andy Moore with me. Andy, introduce yourself.
Hi there. I'm Andy Moore. I'm partner in the Social Housing team. I'm the Head of Antisocial Behaviour and Head of Leasehold as well.
Good to have you with us today, Andy.
Thanks very much.
So we're here today to talk about heat network regulations, Andy.
Yes.
Quite topical at the minute. We've got obviously an energy crisis in place, and we're going to discuss the heat network metering and billing regulations, of which there are two. There's the 2014 regulations and the 2020 regulations. Andy, do you want to give us a bit of background as to what they are?
Absolutely. So prior to, it's been a staged regulatory background in relation to metering and billing. Prior to 2014, the situation was that in district and communal heating, there was no records whatsoever kept in relation to the carbon use of those sorts of schemes. And I think everyone will have seen recently on the news that when people were talking about consumers' bills and the price cap coming in,
Yeah, of course.
and how much people are going to be charged for their individual bills. And there was one section that weren't talked about or were mentioned, but didn't really get focused on, and that was leaseholders and tenants who pay their heating through a service charge. Because they traditionally do not pay through their meters and are not metered in relation to their energy use.
Right, okay.
So while you had customers who were getting paid, who were getting charged through their meters, they could see through the bills and the energy use coming up.
Yeah.
If you've got a service charge, which says you pay X amount per year towards your heating or per week towards your heating, that's it. So, and there was all kinds of extra stuff which was seen about that in relation to who was going to get the money in relation to energy charges coming back and things like that. So there's lots of aspects of it, but very much it was they were left out of the conversation when it came to the cost of heating. So the regulatory background, if we look back at 2014, there was nothing recorded in relation to
bit of a Wild West, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and to a certain extent, it still is. As I'll
give us an insight.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll update you on it in a minute, really. But EU directives came in relation to decarbonisation.
Yes.
So what we had is a situation where, in relation to our communal and district heating, and there's a difference between the two. Effectively, if you've got district heating, that is when you've got a supply going to two or more buildings.
Yes.
So you might have a central heating system.
Yeah.
And then you need to have more than one end user as well.
Yeah.
So you might have two buildings, 4 tenants inside those buildings, for example. Communal heating, one building and multiple users within that. So it might be 1 or 2. So in terms of the situation with landlords and tenants, you had your heating going in from your central source, and that might be an air source heat pump, ground source heat pump, or it might be traditional gas, electricity, whatever, going into that through liquid means. And it was not, or it could have been metered going into those buildings. So effectively you had landlord paying for the energy, and then you had tenants paying for usage through their service charge, or not at all, depending on the sort of scheme they got. So after 2014, there was a drive, and of course you know this in terms of your experience of dealing with decarbonisation through your role as well.
Absolutely.
Is there was 2 aspects that they wanted to bring in, and that was 1, driving down use, and 2, being able to record the carbon use as well.
Yeah, which is quite important, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the latter element in the current world that we're living in and moving towards. Definitely.
Absolutely. So one key way of trying to get down usage is let people know what they're using.
Crucial.
And charging them for what they're using potentially as well.
Yeah.
Because you're in a position where if you've got a communal block, you might have one tenant who leaves their heating on all the time and their windows open.
Yeah.
And then next door, maybe trying to keep down on the bills or very energy conscious and not
Yeah.
keep the heating on at all. But for a service charge, they'd both be getting paid, or they'd both be getting charged exactly the same rate.
Yeah. And of course, driving down heating costs with the way things are going at the minute, it's very much a hot potato politically. But of course, you're going to see a rise in that cost, which is in turn going to lead to potential complaints and issues in terms of this creation. Do the regulations assist with that at all?
They do. So in terms of the classes, and these came in through very little fanfare, and what I found in practice is that these issues only come up when there's a problem in the scheme, and then you realise that actually none of this has been done because they really weren't very well advertised at all, but incredibly important. So you've got 3 classes of building that came in following 2014 and 2020. These were sharpened up, and that's open class, viable class, and non-viable class, effectively, an exempt class. So in terms of those different classes, if it's a class 1 open class, then they must have installed, and I say have installed, should have done already.
Right, okay.
Individual meters or heat cost actuators to the individual properties to make sure that can be metered. And then if they're in that class of building, then there's lots of requirements in terms of upkeep, billing requirements to be able to send bills out to customers as well to ensure that they're keeping up with those requirements.
It looks like it's difficult to achieve in a communal area. Is it something that you've said there that it ought to already been done? I mean, is it something that's likely to have been a big problem for particularly social housing providers? And
it depends on the stock, and I'll go into the exemptions in a moment as well, and that's going to be an important part for providers, because if they've got mixed stock, it's slightly different. You've got your viable class, which is buildings that have been set up and may have the ability to put these meters to be installed.
of course.
Now, in those particular classes of building, what you've got to do then is a cost assessment as to whether or not the costs and benefits merit putting that in. Because if you're going to be charging a service charge of an extra service charge of £5,000, etc., to put these things in, then,
which are not insignificant sums as well.
Absolutely not. In terms of doing that, then it may not be viable for that to be done. So there's an assessment calculator within the regulations themselves to be able to do that.
Is that a set algorithm?
There's a set algorithm on there. And then you've got exempt class, which is types of buildings which it would not be suitable for at all.
Yes.
So it's really important, and I say it's really important because there's offences if it's not done right.
Right.
That would apply to our clients as well. So if our clients have communal heating, and if they're looking to install communal heating, they need to first have a look at whether or not they have made a notification to the register.
Okay. And what are those notification requirements?
So the reporting requirements is effectively a spreadsheet of information that needs to be provided to the Office Product Safety Standards to say what kilowatt is being used, what sort of scheme it is, and then whether heat cost actuators have been installed, whether meters have been installed, and if they've not, why they've not as well. Yeah. And recording in there as well, you're saying what the kilowatt hours and the gigawatt hours are being used within the individual schemes as well. If that's not done, reporting requirements, if you're not doing that, you've got to do that every 4 years as well in relation to reporting of that.
It's an ongoing duty.
It's an ongoing duty, and certainly as well, it's an ongoing duty if it applies and the legislation applies to you in terms of it being an open class or a viable class and it's cost effective for you to do the work.
Yeah.
Then you've got those ongoing requirements as well. And the fines are pretty hefty on it. So there's a statutory maximum of £5,000, which can be applied in relation to the summary offences. But there's also indictable offences which come out of it as well. And there is no statutory maximum.
So you could be facing
for indictable offences. So effectively, it's an unlimited fine that could be applied on there. The statutory minimum is £5,000. It's not clear within the regulations whether or not that's breaches as a whole. Now, of course, if it's a reporting requirement, that's going to be one breach.
Yeah.
If it's failure to install meters, well, potentially that's going to be times by however many properties you've got within your building.
Yeah.
So that'd be 5,000 times 32.
So it could be racking up quite quickly.
Absolutely. And of course, if you've not complied with the metering, well, then you've also not complied with your billing legislation as well.
Of course. So one flows onto another, flows onto another.
So there's
essentially a snowball effect.
There's effectively 6 offences within there, which are notification, meter installation, hot water meters, replacement of meters, ongoing obligations and billing. So you've got 6 offences within there that potentially could stack up.
It's quite significant, isn't it? So what do social housing providers need to do to try and deal with these issues and correct any breaches they may currently have that they're not currently facing any repercussions for?
So in terms of our client stock, I think it's a stock survey.
Right.
Of that, if they've not already done it.
Yeah.
It's first of all understanding.
That's a starting point.
It's a starting point. It's understanding the type of buildings that you've got.
Yeah.
And if you've got any of these communal or district heating systems, is then looking whether or not a notification's been carried out.
Okay.
As I say, the deadline was September for this as well. So in terms of enforcement, it's by the Secretary of State.
Right, okay.
So it's at the discretion of the Secretary of State to enforce on this. I'm not aware of any enforcements in relation to this legislation as of yet in terms of the old requirements too.
Has there been any comment from, for example, the social housing regulator does sometimes put input into new regulations that have come into force?
Very little on it at all.
Silence.
So it's carrying out that stock survey.
But you don't want to put yourself at risk, do you, though, of falling foul of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it may be that you don't, it's an exempt property.
Yeah.
And finding that out and getting advice on that. And I'd say it's key to get advice as to whether or not it falls under the exemptions.
Yeah.
And the exemptions are key as well. So for our clients, it may be that a certain amount of stock under there is leasehold stock.
Yeah.
And if there's a large number of leasehold stock within there, then it may not acquire.
Right.
It may not apply in relation to that. So you've got mixed tenure schemes.
Yeah, of course.
If you've got supported housing as well. So if it's genuine supported housing schemes within there, then again, it may not apply too. Okay. So it's looking at the makeup of your buildings. And as well, a key thing, if clients are not looking to bring in metering, because it might be onerous for them in which to do that, or it might not fit for the particular scheme.
Of course.
If they're setting up new schemes, then they might want to look at the nature of their scheme and how it's set up as to the balance to fall outside of these requirements as well.
It seems though that stock survey could really be helpful for social landlords, couldn't it? Because if you carry out that stock survey, you could immediately find that however many are exempt straight away, so you can reduce your risk there, minimise it and move those off, and then look at the key ones that do potentially fall within the regulations and then try and address those issues as quickly as possible.
I think a lot of it's coming up more recently as well because our clients' contracts that they will be able to get on heating and the discounts that they will be able to pass on in the past are not there anymore.
No,
and I think in the past that because they used to be able to effectively buy energy in bulk and distribute it with that scheme, they used to get a discount on it. But I think increasingly because of the rates of increase, that is a burden that our clients are unable to shoulder in terms of those costs.
Yeah, of course.
And so I'm very often getting asked the question, what can we do to pass that cost on to customers now, potentially?
Yeah.
And then it's rolling backwards to say, okay, well, what sort of scheme have you got?
Yeah, crucial.
And whether or not actually those costs should have already been passed on to customers in relation to the billing requirements and the information that they should be provided
and
as well.
That comes back to the stock survey that you'd suggested. Would that be your key recommendation at this stage? Then seeking advice in terms of potential exemptions and
I think it's
advice on your stock.
It's really important with the cost of energy the way it is at the moment. I think it's a smart time at this point for our client to look at the stock, look at the large buildings that they've got, and whether or not it falls within these particular types of schemes. And if it does, whether or not there's money to be passed on there instead, or obligations to report as well to the regulator. I
mean, obviously decarbonisation and net zero, the net zero challenge that we've got is crucial and very not only politically hot, but it's also societally quite hot as well. We've obviously got the target of net zero, particularly in social housing or housing in general, really, of net zero by 2050. It's an ambitious target. One of the biggest issues, of course, funding, and also how to go about it. Is this something you anticipate? You've mentioned there previously air source and ground source heat pumps. As part of the net zero challenge, we're seeing a lot of particularly social housing providers looking to retrofit stock and install air source heat pump, ground source heat pumps, things of that nature to try and deal with that challenge. Do you then envisage that these heat network regulations will come into more of an effect with a shift into a different source of energy.
Absolutely. So you're changing the type of heating scheme that you might within there. So the consultation, you might have tenants with individual boilers within a property.
Yeah.
Landlords looking to install air source heat pumps, not on individual properties, at the scheme as a whole.
Yeah.
So with that, you're going to have a change of use of the building.
Right.
At that point to say, okay, well, this is going to be a more efficient way of providing energy for everyone. But actually, the sort of energy that we're going to be providing will now make this a communal or a district heating scheme.
Right. So then you'll be caught by these regulations.
So then you'll be caught by the regulations. And it may mean then that you need to look at your tenancy agreements, and you need to look at your billing requirements in relation to there as to, okay, well, if that's the case, do we need to fit heat cost actuators in there? Do we need to fit individual meters in there as well?
Yeah.
Because now we're changing from these individual boilers in properties to a district scheme.
It just adds an extra layer of difficulty, doesn't it, to this decarb net zero challenge, doesn't it, as well? Because as they move towards using air source, ground source heat pumps, you've then caught by these other regulations, and it just becomes trickier, doesn't it? What's your advice? Your best advice in terms
there's a point to it, though.
Yeah.
And the point isn't at the heart of the legislation as it was brought in.
Yeah.
And from the EU directive, which then got brought into our legislation.
Yeah, of course.
Is that it's seen as a key way to drive down use. And that's your first, or to monitor use as well.
Yeah.
It's your first cornerstone, really, when you're looking to try and reach net carbon zero.
Yeah, of course.
Is you need to be using less, and you need to be smart about your use.
Yeah. But in order to do that, you need to know what you use.
Exactly. And if you're not metered, then you don't know. Now, it might be that you've got meters in there, but the billing requirements don't fall into play, because it may be that it's too cost onerous to bill, to put in the billing requirements, but you can try and comply with the regulations as much as you can, or the spirit of the regulations, in terms of letting people know the usage, giving people advice as to how they can use their energy as well in a smarter way, even if you're not caught exactly by the regulations on there.
Brilliant. Very insightful. Thanks very much for that, Andy.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate you coming today. If you've got any queries, please do get in touch with Andy Moore at MSB for further information in relation to heat networks, but also installation of air source and ground source heat pumps, and anything in relation to decarbonisation net zero. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot.